Welcome back to the Exempt List. We have reached the playoffs. The 2023 Super Wildcard round, we're still calling it that, is here. Black Monday has passed. We're still getting coaching news, and to talk about it all, Brett Kollmann, YouTube extraordinaire. I'm sure you've seen him all over the internet, and we will get right into the show with him in a few seconds. Brett Kollmann, content creator extraordinaire. Why don't you just go ahead and plug where you work, because you're probably more visible than me, but still, it's good to know where people can find your work. It's excellent, and it seems like it's really taken off for you in a cool way over the past year or so.
It's been a big year. Definitely learned some lessons about not biting off more than you can chew. But,
Yes.
we got 3 podcasts a week over on the Bootleg Football podcast channel. I got my own channel where I do longer form breakdowns. I do stuff with the Chargers channel now. I do stuff with the NFL channel, and NFL Throwback. And I look forward to June when I can sleep again. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's been a long year. And I'm going to Kansas City this weekend for the Dolphins Chiefs game. And I'm like,
it's like minus 21, dude.
Yeah, right. Which is why I'm excited for the game itself, because I think anytime you can go see Patrick Mahomes play in a high stakes game is something you should take the opportunity to do. But like, the closer I get to it, I started packing my bag this morning, and I put my coat in there. It took up like half my suitcase, and I just quit immediately. I was like, oh God, like I'm not built for this. Like, it's going to be 50 in New York this weekend. How is it going to be minus 20, minus 10 in Kansas City? Like, I honestly, I didn't realize that Kansas City was this much colder than everything else.
So for like topography nerds, not to get too nerdy on this podcast, but Kansas City basically gets blasted by like Arctic air coming down from Canada every single winter, because there's not really anything in the way of it. So like the same way that Iowa freezes every single winter, and Illinois and like all those Midwestern states, Kansas City, like basically from the Arctic Circle, that air will just go straight through Canada and then end up in Kansas City by this time of year, which is why their winters are just brutal for like 3 weeks out of the year. And it always happens to line up with NFL playoffs, which is why Kansas City getting the 1 seed every year is like miserable for the people that have to go cover those games, because they know it's going to be one of the coldest games of the year in Kansas City just because of where they are.
I've been to Chicago a couple of times in the winter because we have, or my dad was from there. So when my grandma used to live in Chicago, we go visit her. And like that I feel like that's one of those things you only need to experience once.
Yeah.
And
Phil.
Right. I just can't believe that it's going to be in the negatives this weekend. And we'll get to, how that could affect the Dolphins later, and, their chances against the Chiefs in general with how banged up they are. But as we always do on the show, we are going to talk about the funniest things from the weekend to start off. And of course, have to start off with the end of the Falcons Saints game, where it was okay. I gotta say, it was funny at first, because I had tuned out of that game once it hit 31-17. I was like, there's no point in staying on track or staying, invested in this game, because it was starting to get out of hand in a way where you knew they weren't going to get back in it. Ritter had a pretty awful second half. Probably the last game he'll start as a Falcon, barring injury over someone over top of him next season.
God willing.
But the Saints were up 41-17 at the end of the game. And the only thing that I had seen was that they had scored a touchdown on the 1-yard line. And Arthur Smith was freaking out at Dennis Allen, saying, hey, that's bullshit. Basically, that's Bush League stuff. And at first I was like, chill. And then I actually saw the play. And I immediately understood why he was mad, because it's like I don't think running up the score is real once you get past like JV level sports. Like, I don't know, it's sports. Mm-hmm. If you want to, if there's time on the clock, then you should play if you want to. But to go into a victory formation and then hand the ball off, that is kind of Bush League stuff. Like that's where I understand why Arthur was so mad. And also because like that's a That's a pretty big injury risk too. Like if you're, it's basically the one fundamental unwritten rule that football has. When you go into a victory formation, we're not going to hit each other on this play. You know, like the game's over. So I'm not going to be in a spot where I'm going to be defending myself 100% or, you know, maybe not even like 50% because we're just trying to get to the end of the game and get back to the locker room. So like when you have grown football players coming after guys who are not defending themselves 100%, yeah, that's where I understand Arthur's anger. But it was still fun to see him just lose his absolute and then get fired like 7 hours later.
It was such a Jameis Winston moment too. Like that moment can only involve Jameis Winston, if we're being honest. And truthfully, my first reaction to it was, okay, if you're gonna just ignore your coach and call a run play, like don't do it from victory formation for all the reasons you said. And then my second reaction was, is Dennis Allen getting fired? Because he just had a bunch of players just actively disobey him on the last play of the season. Like
it was straight up insubordination.
They said no. Yeah, from like 11 guys all together on the field just saying like, nah, like we're not going to listen to our coach. And I feel like that doesn't happen to Andy Reid. That doesn't happen to John Harbaugh. When it happened to Dennis Allen. And so my first reaction was like, do the players know that he's not going to be there next year? Like, why are they doing this? Because it's like you said, straight up insubordination. We just don't see that in the NFL.
The fact that this was a Falcons Saints game also adds something to it. Because that's like a real deal rivalry. I know recently the Saints have kind of had the upper hand in terms of record and the amount of games that they've won against the Falcons. But dude, I went to the last regular season game in the Georgia Dome in 2016 when the Falcons beat the Saints and they had like Michael Vick and Roddy White come out on a convertible at halftime, a whole bunch of Falcons legends. And there was a fight in the bathroom between Falcons and Saints fans, and someone stole my phone charger that I was using so I could take video of the event. And then there were people like brawling in the street after the game. Like this is a very real deal rivalry. So when Jimmy Graham goes on Twitter afterwards and says, whatever, yeah, we scored a touchdown, the Falcons, like that's also a part of this. You know, I do think the Jameis element of this is very funny, where he's just going to take the charge and say, actually, we're going to score a touchdown. I don't know if there was any incentives involved in this. People have been saying that. I can't imagine there were, because I think there's only Jamal Williams' second touchdown of the year after he scored 17 last year.
I think it might have been his first.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of layers here, but I will say, if you watch the play, I don't think that Arthur Smith was wrong to be as upset as he was, because dude, it's the last play of the season. You know, you're about to go on vacation. Neither team's made the playoffs. Just why are we trying to bowl people over who aren't really defending themselves in the last play of the season? Come on.
Not to mention, like, Arthur Smith knew he was getting fired, and so it just felt like, man, I'm on my way out of here. Like, you don't got to do that to me.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, again, Saints players are, of course, going to be like, yeah, we do. Like, we hate you. But like, I get it.
It's funny because Osi Umenyiora, who played for the Falcons for a little bit in like the early 2010s, he posted a clip of him blowing up a kneel attempt against the Saints. And he was like, actually, it's fine because I did this too. I was like, that doesn't make it okay. But I can respect the pettiness of just like the overall rivalry. But yeah, Smith is gone. You know, like you said, I'm sure that played into the frustration a little bit. Like, your last game as a head coach, maybe ever in the NFL, was getting trounced 48-17, and then they run on the last play. Yeah, I'd be a little hot too. But to be fair to Dennis Allen, he did apologize. Saints players, less so.
Yeah, they're not going to.
The nature of no. And you know what? Here's the truth. Like, yeah, we'll be mad about this until. Well, I mean, I'm not even mad about it at all, really. I was just, kind of annoyed when I actually saw the play. But the thing is, you just have to endure the little PR hit for like 24 hours, and then people move on, and you still got to have it your way at the end of the day, because we all have the attention spans of goldfish.
Yeah. And, you know, if the Falcons want to get him back, they can get him back next season.
Yeah. We'll see about that. This is a pretty big offseason for the Falcons. I'm a little nervous with how things are trending right now. Cause like you could either put yourself in a spot to like comfortably win a division next year, or you could be stuck ruddering the boat for the next 2-3 years again. So we'll see what happens. Moving on to another team. I thought that this was funny. The Dolphins finished the season with precisely one win over a team with a winning record. That was the Dallas Cowboys, who they beat 22-20 a couple weeks ago. And I use that to ask you this, Brett. Based on that, and I guess based on everything else we've seen for the last, let's call it, month or so from the Dolphins, how scared should Dolphins fans be about this upcoming Saturday in Kansas City?
Oh, they should be terrified. Like, absolutely terrified, because these are not the conditions that the Dolphins win games in. And, you know, it's 70 degrees in Miami, and then you step off the plane, and in temperatures like that, I mean, you get frostbite in 15 minutes of exposure, right? And so you're stepping off the plane, and like the energy just leaves your body, and they're not used to that. Hell, most human beings that even live in Kansas City are not used to that. And when you factor in that, you know, Tyreek Hill is second in the NFL in drops this season, it's not like it's going to be easier to catch a brick in those kind of temperatures. When you factor in that against a lot of the run concepts that the Dolphins rely on to hit the edges, outside zone, you know, pin and pull concepts, everything like that, all the too high structures that Kansas City plays, like they tend to have pretty good leverage on those because the safeties are wider, so they can come downhill a lot easier. Like schematically speaking, it's not a great matchup. Temperature wise, it's not a great matchup, let alone they're down their top 3 edge rushers now. So like the one thing that you can kind of hang your hat on in a fully healthy Dolphins versus Chiefs matchup is like, oh, we have edge rushers that we think can beat their tackles because their tackles aren't very good in pass pro. Well, now you don't have any edge rushers left. And I just think this game lines up for like the one time Isaiah Pacheco gets 20 plus carries. And I think eventually, like by the second half, that's just going to break the Dolphins because I don't think they can throw their way out of this in that kind of temperature. And that's like their one hope that they normally would have.
Yeah. It's just, I kind of struggle with the idea that like, well, they haven't beat many teams with a winning record. They just won't do it. But like, they might not this year. And I also struggle with like the idea in the NFL of like, what does like a finesse team really mean? Because like, you got to be tough as to play really any style of football. But maybe there is something to it in the way that sometimes like when I'm watching the Dolphins pass game, especially like some of the quick game stuff they do, it feels like I'm watching like a cut up of YouTube, like Madden cheese plays where it's like, well, dropping back, one step, drop back, spots open, here's Tyreek Hill, 99 speed, and we're off to the races. When those plays aren't working and when it gets congested and they have to play like real drop back football, it looks so ugly every single time. And I get concerned about Tua. Yeah, I said this to someone else the other day, but I feel like Tua plays quarterback like people who play Madden, where, you know, when you have the call sheet up and you're going to call some play, the first read or the preferred route to throw to shows up in red, you know, on the playbook, and Tua is throwing to the red route every time, no matter if it's covered, no matter who's over there. It's like, and I was like, bro, at some point you need to start reacting to like what's happening downfield. The Ravens game was so bad. I think it was either the first or second pick where 4 Ravens defenders had converged on the area he was going to throw to before he'd even thrown the ball. And I'm like, dude, the picture changed. You have to change and how you operate. And I think, especially against a defensive coordinator like Spags, in this condition, I get a little nervous about how that could play out for him. And then you get into like the long game stuff, right? Like, how much do the Dolphins pay Tua? How much, you know, how long do they want to commit to him? Do they even want to see if they can flip him now for a more talented guy? But and it feels kind of to say that, because I do think that Tua is a quality quarterback where obviously if he's your quarterback in the right situation, like we've seen, like you can score 70 points in a game. You can have one of the best offenses in the league, but we're hitting this point where every year it seems like you're starting to hit the wall at the end of the season with him and the offense. And that's just something that they're going to have to figure out. And it doesn't seem like this is going to be the week for them to figure it out, even though I think, when you're looking at Kansas City's offense and what they've been, it's doable for them, but they have some serious problems of their own.
Yeah. And my tinfoil hat theory, by the way, on Tua is the reason why McDaniels calls so much motion is because it kind of dictates what coverages you can and can't play. Cause like you have, like if you're in a too high structure and then you get that exit motion, like there's really only two things you can do. You can either bump out or you can spin with it. And the fact that you use motions to dictate coverages means that Tua can just kind of like be a vibes-based quarterback, and he just looks at one guy and they see how he's reacting, and then he throws to the space. And the Ravens did a good job of just kind of like not playing into those expectations against all the motions. And they're like, no, we're going to do what we're going to do. Like, you got to react to us. And they kind of dictated. And like Tua kind of short circuited several times in that game because he's like, whoa, you're not supposed to react that way. Like, you're playing it different than how I expected it. And the difference between how Tua plays it versus how Stafford plays in a similar system with a similar kind of amount of motions is Stafford is so much better at understanding in a split second when something is not going the way he expects it and then reacting to it. Whereas Tua is like not a very reactionary quarterback. Like, he gets his pre-snap picture. He sees during the motion how they're reacting. And then like you say, I don't want to call it a one read quarterback, but it kind of is. And you can get away with that for a while. But once Mike McDonald gets 10 weeks of film on you, like, he's going to eviscerate you on national TV if you do that.
Which is frustrating to me because, like, damn, like you look at this offense, you should score like 30 a game. Like, every time I watch Devon Achane, I'm blown away by how easy just getting downhill and getting in the open field is for him. Like, it feels like every time he touches the ball, he's going to go for 9-10 yards, if not more. Tyreek Hill, we know how dynamic he is. We know how good Jalen Waddle is. I know that Waddle's been banged up, but it just feels like at this point they're kind of starting to hit that wall again. And I will say, I don't think that Mike McDaniel set him up in the best way last week against Buffalo. They probably should have run the ball a little bit more, but then, you still have a chance at the end of the game to get back into it. And we've seen time and time again for them when they have to just run like a pretty standard offense to get down the field. That's where they struggle. I remember the first game they played against Buffalo where they lost like 48-20. Josh Allen scored so fast that they couldn't run like the normal, kind of some of the gimmicky stuff that they do. And they had to start dropping back for real without Teron Armstead. And like, to me, that's where you start to see limitations of Tua. It's like, okay, you have to create now because the situations aren't perfect. And to me, like, he actually turns into like a bad quarterback in those situations sometimes where he starts to panic, he starts to press, but he doesn't always have like the physical skill set to get past those situations. So we'll see how that looks in minus 10-degree weather on Saturday night, where a spot where the Dolphins have been pretty bad, understandably. Like, if I lived in Miami, you wouldn't see me anywhere near a day that had less than 50 degrees for the rest of my life. And here comes minus 20 in Kansas City against the Chiefs and a pretty good defense. On the flip side, real quick, before we move on to another funny thing from the weekend, how confident are you that Patrick Mahomes can lead the charge to a Super Bowl appearance for the Chiefs?
It's funny. I'm putting out a video on this week. I think the Chiefs need to just basically be the 2000 Baltimore Ravens, and not because Patrick Mahomes is having any issues, but their receiving core is not built to be a team that throws at the fourth highest rate in the NFL, which is what they are. And, even go back a couple of years when they had Tyreek, like, they were 24th in average depth of target, even when they had Tyreek, but they were so good at generating yak and explosives after the catch that it kind of didn't matter. Like, they used the quick passing game as an extension of the run game. They can't really do that right now other than when they throw to Rashee Rice. But, Sky Moore's not breaking tackles in space. Kadarius Toney's not breaking tackles in space. Justin Watson for sure ain't doing it. And Travis has slowed down. He's not getting explosives after the catch at a rate that he did a couple of years ago. He's down like 35, 40% in that area. So like they're trying to run a similar offense of like not stretching the field and, kind of playing more horizontal and being a yak based offense, which has worked in the past, but they can't do it now because they just don't have the dudes. So for me, I look at what they do well, which is running the ball. They have an elite explosive run rate. They're top 8 or so in virtually every single individual rushing concept other than outside zone, because they run it from the gun. They run it from shotgun and it sucks from shotgun. But inside zone, power, counter, pin and pull, like they're good in all those. They just don't do them very often. And so I think, basically turn Isaiah Pacheco into a bell cow back. You play good defense and you see how far that can get you. But what they're doing now, throwing and throwing and throwing, it hasn't worked all year and it's not going to work. So they have to change.
Yeah. I'm never going to be out on the Chiefs like fully. I think I still haven't going to the AFC title game against Baltimore. But
I can see
we'll
it.
See. Yeah.
I can see it.
But I don't know if they have the horses to beat Baltimore this year, but I do think they can kind of squeeze their way there. One of the last things, real quick, before we get into some of these head coach openings. I say this as a fan of the team who blew a 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl and lost. This is one of the worst choke jobs I think that I have ever seen. And I do understand the Jaguars fans out there who are kind of taking this with a glass half full approach. We're like, hey, we lose all the time. We just had back-to-back 9-8 seasons. We've seen worse. I understand that. But you were 8-3. Like, okay, 6 weeks ago, we were talking about this team with a chance to compete for the number 1 seed. Like, things were lining up so perfectly for them. Walking into the Monday night game against Jake Browning and the Bengals, and everything fell apart for them. So you start off 8-3, you finish 9-8, losing against the damn Titans of all teams. Like probably your biggest rival, most hated team. You end up losing that game, getting knocked out of the playoffs, and now I can't get over this. To me, it's just such a catastrophic failure when you look at like the track record from where they were last year, where the last 5-6 weeks of the season, Trevor Lawrence just absolutely blacked out, led them to the playoffs. Then they have a comeback against the Chargers. You go into that game against Kansas City. You actually put up a pretty good fight against Kansas City, even though you lose that game. And then you come back, and it feels like this is the year where you put it together. And then you start off 8-3, like you're doing it. Maybe it's not the cleanest 8-3. You're not blowing people out like every week like Baltimore is, but you finished 9-8. I don't understand how this is even possible. The question that I have about all of this really is firing the defensive coordinator what you need to do to fix this? Like how much is swapping out Mike Caldwell for someone else gonna change like your fortunes for next year? I agree that there's points where he could be upgraded from, but it's not like they had the worst defense in the league this year. They had a pretty quality unit. I don't know. To me, it just only firing Mike Caldwell and like some assistant coaches, it doesn't seem to me like they're actually serious about turning this thing on the right foot for next season. What are your thoughts on where Jacksonville is right now?
They're kind of an interesting chicken or the egg scenario to me, because they invested a lot, especially in the linebacking core, and their linebackers aren't very good. And so it's like, okay, did Trent Baalke make bad picks and bad investments, or did the coaches just not take those players and coach them up as well as they should? And I really don't know the answer to that, because like I genuinely liked Lloyd as a prospect. Like I thought Oluokun was a great investment, and they just got worse when they got to Jacksonville. So I'm like, did Baalke get it wrong, or is the coach is not good? And then, you look at the interior defensive line, they have the second worst pass rush win rate among all defensive tackle groups in the entire NFL. Like they could not get any interior pressure. And so you're asking Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker to do all the work. And Josh Allen had a great year, and Walker certainly had a better year this year than last year. But like, that's not enough. And then, when it comes to the secondary, they're one of those teams that tries to be like Steve Spagnuolo, where, hey, we're going to call all these funky rotations on third down, and we're going to trick you. Except the difference between Spags and the Jags is that, like, when Spags calls like two invert, it actually works. The Jags did it, they would give up 40-yard touchdowns. Like, this is one of the only teams in the NFL that gave up a top 10 explosive rushing rate and like a top 14 explosive pass rate. Like, if you're putting up a scatter plot of like explosive runs allowed and explosive passes allowed, the Jags were in the bad quadrant, like next to Philly and Seattle. So I think the spine of the defense is broken. They would bust at the absolute worst possible times. Trevor getting hurt didn't help either, but even before Trevor got hurt, like, they were terrible in the red zone. They were not good on third down. Like, so much about this team was just fundamentally broken. And it took until about 11 weeks into the season for that to really manifest itself. They're kind of an interesting mirror of the Eagles, where it feels like if they took a few losses earlier on in the year, I think we would have been more critical of them and kind of being like, something's not quite right here. But because they had the record they did, we were like, it'll get better. Like, they'll figure it out. And then they just didn't. And then they both flamed out.
I'm not nearly as low on Trevor Lawrence. It's like, I feel like, well, we can be so reactionary with some of these quarterback takes sometimes. I still feel pretty fine about Trevor Lawrence being the quarterback in Jacksonville. I honestly thought, outside of the ridiculous, Disney movie sneak attempt that he had at the end of that game, like, dude, he had Airbud brain. Like, oh, I'm gonna be the hero. I'm gonna be the hero. And I didn't even realize it until, like, I didn't realize how bad it was until Baldy uploaded the clip and you see the right guard on the front side pulling. I'm like, oh no, Trev. Like, you're sneaking and you have an offensive lineman literally running away from you. Like, that's a little bold, my friend. Outside of that play, though, I thought he played a pretty clean game. I honestly thought the second pick that he threw was on Zay Jones, just not the right route depth. I think if you go back and look at it on the other side, Calvin Ridley kind of just showed you how that route was supposed to be run, and Trevor threw it to where he thought he was going to be, and he wasn't there. It got turned into a pick. It's like, you still have your quarterback. It just feels like, to me, the moves that they made ended up being to protect Doug, Bulky, and Press at the end of the day, more so than actually making their football team better. And like, this is where you get into the point where now people are in saving jobs mode more so than, I need to, do the best thing I can for this team. And I think that's a little bit dangerous place to be for the Jaguars. But they'll figure it out. This is not the worst thing that's ever happened to the Jaguars. Hey, you have a quarterback. You have a quarterback. That's way more than we can say for most of the past 20 years of Jaguars football, which is basically their entire existence. So
let me ask you this. Let's say the Falcons hire Ben Johnson or whoever your ideal candidate for the Falcons is. Would you rather be the Falcons right now or the Jags?
I'd rather be the Jaguars to give a quarterback.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Dude, okay, my take on the Falcons is, I really don't care who the coach is. Like, who's going to be the quarterback? That's the thing that I'm most concerned with. Like Arthur Blank can coach the team himself if he can figure out how to get a quarterback. Because, like, even when people talk to me, wouldn't you be excited about Ben Johnson? It's like, maybe, but like, if Taylor Heinicke is a quarterback, no.
What about Ben Johnson and Justin Fields? Do you think those mesh?
Yeah, I do. Because I don't think that Atlanta's offensive line is quite as bad as they put together this year. Like, Bergeron's a rookie. They have some injuries. So I think there's a lot of room for the floor to get a lot better. But, like, you've got to get, like, just league average quarterback play, I would kill for. Just league average. And honestly, like, it's frustrating because I thought Ritter had a chance to get there. And I still think that there's something in there, but you just can't turn the ball over as much as he does. And it's just like the most ridiculous turnovers that he knows that he shouldn't do, but it's like an impulse that he can't stop doing. So look, get a quarterback and then we can figure out from there. But people are like, oh, Belichick, Harbaugh. I'm like, dude, who cares? Just find someone who can throw the ball without fumbling 3 times in the game or putting themselves at risk for like a safety every time we get pinned. I just got so sick watching that team this year.
I can't believe you stuck it out for 18 weeks, man.
I know. I just can't quit. And honestly, I've just accepted that about myself instead of pretending like I'm not going to watch these games. So I'll turn them on. But later in the season, once they started kind of, pissing away the games, I would just leave it on the background and I could turn it off if it gets too bad. And I've watched enough Falcons games at this point to know like when they're going to quit and when they're going to lose. So like once they hit the 31-17 point on the Saints game, I think that was in the third quarter. I was out on that game. So yep. Goodbye. See you in a few weeks for this head coaching, and then we'll come back to the draft. The last funny thing before we get into the head coach openings, and this is a segue into the head coach openings. The Panthers scored 0 points over the final 2 weeks of the season. And I want to say that to ask you this. If you're the Panthers, what are you selling a head coach on why they be outside of money? Because Tepper can offer however much money he wants because it's like literally pocket change for him. What would you say to a head coaching candidate to get them excited about this team? Because they're in a spot where they kind of have to, advertise themselves to candidates as much as candidates have to advertise themselves to the Panthers.
The only thing they have going for them is I will give you the job, which makes them a prime candidate for like Wink Martindale, Leslie Frazier, guys that aren't going to get hired somewhere. Like it's literally the same situation as the Texans 3 years ago, where nobody was going to go there. And so they hired David Culley to just be like, all right, we need somebody. Let's just get through this year. And then, they brought in Lovey after that, build Lovey a statue outside the stadium for all I care. Like that man is amazing. And then eventually they got lucky enough that like D'Amico was already a franchise legend and like had ties to the city and ties to the organization and like agreed to come save them after they got rid of Jack Easterby, of course. And like Andre, of course, pitched to D'Amico of like, hey, come here, please. We have the second overall pick. We got money. Like we'll figure it out. And then they figured it out. But it was a bad 3 to 4 years leading up to that. And that's what the Panthers are in the middle of right now. Doesn't mean they can't get out of it, but like they're going to have to do the David Culley thing this year and bring in Wink or Leslie or something like that just to get through this garbage time period where they don't have picks and they don't have any hope. And then David Tepper's going to have to go away because nobody's going to come until David Tepper goes away.
Good luck with that.
I know. Hedge fund guys typically don't like to do that, but give it 2 years. If Tepper just sinks into the background and he's like, I'll pay you $15 million a year. We have picks, we have money. Then the job can be attractive. But for now, nobody's going to touch it. Yeah.
To me, we all know the saying, all good money or all money ain't good money. Right. But there's going to be a point where David Tepper keeps turning the dial on that offer, and it's like, to me, I feel like that's how the Panthers can get into the game because they have one of the richest owners in the league, literally one of the richest people in the world. And it kind of reminds me of the Pistons situations where they hired Monty Williams. Monty Williams was basically done coaching, but how are you going to say no to $85 million?
I know. Like you can retire for the rest of your life.
It's just irresponsible to say no at some point. And I feel like that's where the Panthers are probably going to have to find themselves if they want to get someone that's quality and someone that's reputable because it's already been reported on a few places that Ben Johnson's asking for like $15 to $20 million a year. Make it 25, make it 30 for the Panthers. Because the situation's bad. I actually just wrote about this for this morning. This is a really long rebuild, man. Like this is they are not in a good spot. Because obviously you start off, they don't have the pick this year, which I feel pretty fine saying that if they had their first round pick this year, well, one, they wouldn't have Bryce Young, but let's say there's this universe where they have Bryce Young and they have the first overall pick in this draft. I feel pretty confident saying Bryce Young would get Josh Rosen's pretty quick and they would just start over with someone else and just hand them a crap roster with a bad team around him. But so you don't have the pick. You have cap space, but like you also need to figure out the Brian Burns thing, and you don't have like enough cap space where you can plug every single hole because you have a hole at pretty much every spot, especially on offense. So like, and then you start looking back at, man, like they were pretty reckless in how they tried to acquire quarterbacks when Tepper got here. Because it wasn't only the Bryce Young trade. They traded for Sam Darnold. They traded for Baker Mayfield. They traded up for Matt Corral. They traded up for Will Grier. And you start to see like, okay, like you've taken some hacks here, buddy. And none of them have panned out at all. And now you see the rest of the roster is suffering as well. So I'm pretty worried about where Bryce Young is as he played. I don't think a lot of quarterbacks will have success in his spot. But the problem is, like, I don't even know how much they can build this up for next season based on where they are. Like, if you're T. Higgins, I know that area of the country may feel like home, but that's probably a pretty bad career move outside of just, eating up a bunch of cap space and getting a big contract. I struggle to see how they're going to get people to convince people to see like, hey, we're building something here. This is something you should be a part of, because they don't really have the assets to kind of get things moving. Seems pretty clear Brian Burns is going to be on another team. He had 6 sacks this year. Remember in 2022, the Rams had offered 2 first-round picks for Brian Burns. And you're like, damn, wish we had done that one now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember a time that I've seen an NFL team feel as hopeless as the Panthers do. It's almost baffling.
They might get a 2 for Burns in like a Montez Sweat type deal, like maybe at this point. And if T's going to go there, like they're going to have to in the open market, T. Higgins is probably getting 25, like 24, 25. For Carolina, it's going to be 28. Like that's what they're going to have to pay, right? And then of course, once he gets 28, then Justin Jefferson's getting like 32 and Shamar's getting 33. So like it's like T. Higgins is going to get like a quasi Christian Kirk type deal in the sense that if he goes to Carolina, it's going to elevate the wide receiver market so much because they're going to have to overpay him so much. And beyond that, like again, you gotta work out Derek Brown long term. Like they actually do have some fun defensive pieces, not gonna lie. Like, and their defense was watchable this year, more than watchable, I would say. But if your leading receiver is Adam Thielen, and you have 100 catches going to Adam freaking Thielen at this point, like it's not just T. Higgins. Like you got to sign even more than T. Higgins. So most of their cap space is going to go to the offensive side of the ball. Not to mention a lot of their offensive line picks and investments haven't worked out. Like Ike Ekwonu. My God, have you watched Ike this year?
Yeah, can't play.
Dude,
I don't know what happened.
It reminds me about who's that Minnesota tackle that was like great as a rookie in 2012 and then fell off a cliff.
Matt Khalil.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like he was good as a rookie and then got to year 2 and couldn't block anybody. And
well, at least Matt had injuries that he could blame.
That's true. That's true.
But this is just weird.
I don't know what they do because you have questions at quarterback still, and I love Bryce coming out, but like there are questions. Like we have eyes, like we can see this. They have questions at left tackle. They have massive questions at receiver, and that's if they even get T. They don't have Christian McCaffrey to run the offense anymore. Like I don't know what they do.
See, but let's say you kind of blow, for lack of a better term, blow your load on T. Higgins and plop him into this offense. It's still a bottom 5 offense, Like
at best.
It's still at best, yeah. It's still one of the worst offenses in the league. So yeah, it's like you need to be smart about this and how you go through it. But also, there's just nothing here. Like 2024 is a wasteland for them, and then by 2025, if they're again one of the worst teams in the league, like they'll be picking another quarterback at the top of the draft. So it almost feels like maybe they'll just find a David Culley. You grit through the year, fire him again, and then move on with a clean slate in 2025. But this is bleak. So before we move on to the rest of the teams, if you had to pick one, if you had a best case scenario head coaching hire for the Panthers, who would it be?
Oh man, I guess Bobby Slowick. just because seeing what he did with CJ Stroud, beginning of the year going against a Ravens defense when you have 80% backup offensive linemen in there and they still look competent. And then they look more than competent as the year went on when they weren't going against the Ravens. And then by the time they got like all their actual offensive linemen back, like they were cooking, they were getting more pass yards per game than anybody else. This is a man who turned Nico Collins into like, we like Nico Collins' potential, into like, oh my God, he's a legitimate wide receiver one. Tank Dell, overshadowed by Puka, obviously, but Tank Dell had a phenomenal rookie year. Dalton Schultz had a great year. Like, that man knows offense, and he knows how to generate offense, even when all the pieces aren't quite elite, other than maybe the quarterback. And so if anybody can go in there, and I'm not saying like save Bryce Young, but certainly be a lot better than what they had last year in terms of giving Bryce Young like a structure that he might be able to succeed in, I think it'd be Bobby Slowick. But for his sake, I hope he doesn't do it, because that might ruin his life.
That'd be a terrible move for him. Yeah. If I was the Panthers, I think I would hire Mike Vrabel. We need to start looking like a football team again. I don't know if that's the best thing for Bryce Young, but culturally, organizationally, we need to start looking like a football team again. Which brings us to Titans, and just a general question: do you agree with Mike Vrabel being fired? Because I thought that was kind of crazy.
No. Yeah. And we first heard about it. There was rumblings, I guess you could say, in the NFL community about it in like October. And when they traded Kevin Byard, I was like, oh yeah, he's gone. Like, they don't trade, like Vrabel would not allow Kevin Byard to be traded. When we heard rumblings about Derrick Henry being on the block, I was like, that's not a move that Vrabel would do if Vrabel had any sort of power there. And that's what convinced me that like the Vrabel hot seat stuff back in October was real. And then Levis kind of popped off a little bit. And so I think it kind of altered the timeline. But this whole year, I was kind of going through it thinking that Vrabel was going to be fired, while also thinking that that was an absolutely insane move, and hoping that the Titans would be good enough in the back half to like walk themselves off the cliff. And they got a big statement win against Miami where the team didn't give up, and they came back and they won that. They knocked the Jags out of the playoffs. Like, I genuinely thought that was going to be enough to save him, and that, Amy Adams-Strunk was going to realize like, oh, this is really stupid. We shouldn't do this. And then they did it anyway. And so I'm like, hey man, God tried to send you guys a couple signs that it was a bad idea, and you still did it. So whatever happens next is their own fault. Yeah,
it's just weird when teams get like dead set, fixated on, well, we're done here. Why? You guys are the biggest damn overachievers of like the past 5 years of football. I never thought that roster was great, even when they were, getting to like the AFC title game against the Chiefs and upsetting Baltimore in 2019. Like, we look at the organization that they've had, how good they've been, like between the margins. That's Vrabel stuff. And I just find it hard to believe that you'll be able to upgrade from that. And you know what? It's never good when the owner feels like they need to get on camera and explain themselves.
That was so weird, right?
Firing. Right. It's like, you're making a bad decision because you're doing what no owner ever does, gets ahead of a problem that's coming down the pipeline. And like, dude, just the outpour from former players, media people. Like, I there had to be a moment last night where the Titans were sitting at home like, damn, messed up. We might have messed up here. Because, I'm sure Vrabel will take his time and see what happens with the playoffs, but he could probably get just about any job that he wanted. I mean, people are going to talk about him being the guy for the Patriots. I think that would be a pretty perfect fit as far as they go, if they do move on from Bill Belichick, which I feel like, people have reported that it's coming, but I don't know. That's a tough emotional decision for Robert Kraft to end up pulling the trigger on. So we'll see.
I kind of feel, there's multiple reasons why I don't think Bill was part of Black Monday. Part of it is I'm sure they're trying to see if anybody wants to trade. But the other part of it is you don't just fire Bill Belichick on Black Monday. Like, you give him his own day. You give him a proper send off. You present it as much as you possibly can as like a mutually parting of ways. Like, you don't just fire Bill Belichick. And so I have to imagine Vrabel and or Vrabel's agent have already been in contact with New England of like, hey, if we give Bill like a proper send off, can you just chill and wait for a little bit and then we'll bring you in? And I'm sure that Vrabel would say yes to that because like Vrabel loves New England. Like they're probably top of each other's list. But I think the reason why Bill wasn't just outright fired immediately is because you don't do that to the greatest coach of all time. Like you take your time with that. And so I don't think we're going to hear anything about Belichick this week. We might not even hear about it till middle of next week because you don't even get to hire anybody till after the divisional round anyway. And then I think, Vrabel will probably take some interviews in places and everything like that. But I think he's waiting for Belichick to go.
Yeah, this is a weird situation over there with New England and Tennessee too. More so Tennessee because like, man, like Vrabel, even with how bad his season went, he still had a winning record at the end of like his whole Titans run. Yeah, a lot of good playoff moments, a lot of overachieving. I don't know. It's just a little bit odd. I would be concerned about the direction of the franchise if I was a Titans fan, because to me, like that seems like the perfect guy that can weather the storm of a rebuild and trying to get back towards the top of the AFC South. I mean, you were already doing the grit and grind stuff. That's what rebuild football is all about. Just trying to get it out the mud real quick. And now they're starting over. Another team is starting over, and we're gonna try to rapid fire through the rest of these. The Commanders. Well, actually, no. I feel like the Commanders are probably the perfect team to just go with the hot young offensive mind. We're gonna have the second pick in the draft. We're 100% taking a quarterback. If the benching of Sam Howell at the end, or the attempted benching of Sam Howell, I should say, at the end of the season, was any indication. And I think this is a great spot for like Ben Johnson or Slowick, that kind of guy. And it's different now because Dan Snyder's not there anymore. So you should feel a little bit better about what's going on in Washington. What about you? What's your take on what they should do and where they kind of go from here?
Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick are getting a lot of the headlines for who Commanders fans want. I also want to throw out Dave Canales from Tampa, who in the last 2 years did a great job of like reviving Geno Smith's career, and he got a big contract. And then he went down to Tampa and did a great job of reviving Baker Mayfield's career, and he's probably going to get a nice contract from Tampa because they're not going to move on from him. Like they made the playoffs with him. And I think his ability to get the absolute most out of his quarterback over the last couple of years makes me excited for what he could potentially do with. I don't know what order exactly Caleb and May and Jane Daniels are going to go in yet. Like we have 4 months to debate that, but like they're going to take one of them. And I really like the idea of Canales working with one of those young kids and kind of bringing them along. Because if you have a great play caller with a hotshot young quarterback, you still got Terry. Like I still believe in Jahan Dotson. We got some running backs we like. Offensive line isn't perfect, but it's not the worst in the league. Like there's stuff there for a potentially really good offense. And I would love Canales to go there.
Yeah, that's a good fit. And that's just, look, you got to do something a little bit exciting here. The Rivera era was like nothing. It had like nothing happened for 4 years, except for them bottoming out this year and getting the second overall pick. I was trying to think like, what's the one defining moment of the Ron Rivera watching the Commanders run? Like him getting pissed at the players for not getting vaccinated?
Dan selling the team was the only thing that, like, it was all a fever dream, and then Dan sold, and then we went back to being a fever dream. Like, that's what happened.
Dude, if you told me the Commanders didn't play a football game for the past 4 years, I might believe you. Like, it was just, they just weren't. They were just here existing. And now, based on virtue of having the second overall pick in a class where the quarterback's going to be crammed at the top, you at least have the optimism that something else is going to happen. And hey, you have a pretty good backup in Sam Howell moving forward. Like that's a good QB2 situation, or even if you want to trade him to another team that thinks he can be their QB1, things are finally looking up in Washington. The Raiders. Dude, I feel like if you don't get Jim Harbaugh, just run it back with Antonio Pierce.
I
too much
would even
success.
put AP above Harbaugh. Honestly,
Why is that?
I would say like I'm a big guy that, or I am a big guy, but I'm a guy that's a big believer in terms of like locker room is king, and you can lose games in the NFL. You can't lose the locker room. If they do anything but hire Antonio Pierce, they're going to lose the locker room. Like we just went through this with Bisaccia. The team wanted Bisaccia. They said no. They hired the exact opposite of Bisaccia and got worse. And then they gave the job to AP, and all of a sudden the players gave a again. And what do you know? They started winning games. Like I'm a huge believer in Antonio Pierce, and I think that he is such a great leader of men. And I think that with the veteran core that they have there, which is also full of a bunch of leaders, you got Max, Devontae, all them. Like this can very easily be a player-led team, and player-led teams in the NFL can be a very dangerous thing. And I mean that in a good way. Like when you have a great core of veterans, as well as a coach that is willing to work with them and not be like a tyrant over them. I look at some of the best teams in the NFL that have that kind of, the Chiefs. I would say the Ravens are very similar. I would say the Rams too. Like the reason why the Rams are good this year is because they have a coach that is really good at working with their veteran core of leaders to bring along those young guys. Like the Raiders can be that type of organization, a player-led organization. And what people don't realize is the reason why Jim got better at Michigan is because that's the direction he went with. Like he really leaned on his 4th, 5th, and 6th year guy. Well, 6 year because of COVID, but like Michigan was a player run team this year. That's why they won without Jim even being in the building. And so I think if you're getting rid of a guy who's a player's coach to bring in a Jim Harbaugh who do the exact same thing, when I would just rather stick with AP because all the veterans want him. We just went through this with Bisaccia, and I don't think they should make the same mistake twice. Like, just let Jim go to the Chargers. Like, he's going to go to the Chargers. Let him do that. You run it back with AP. You keep the good vibes going. You have a good draft. Maybe you get lucky and Aiden O'Connell turns into Kirk Cousins. You never know. But I think blowing it up and trying to bring in somebody else, it would be a mistake. It really would.
Yeah, I think it might be a little different if they had like the first pick, but they don't. So I don't think there's any right. There's no harm in kind of just running back and seeing how it goes. And I think one of the most interesting things is if you just go by Ben Baldwin's RBDM.com, his EPA stats over there. The Raiders, they had the second best defense in the league over like the 8-week stretch where Antonio Pierce was the head coach. And before that, the 8 weeks before where Josh McDaniels was there, it was like 26th or 27th. So it's not even like you have to look at the data. Like you can just literally watch them as human beings. They clearly responded to him being the head guy, and they got a lot better. And we'll see what happens. I don't think the Raiders are like contenders or anything, but that's they from where they were, from now compared to where they were in like October, it feels like a totally different team. And that's something that should matter when they get into. I think it's only Antonio Pierce or Harbaugh, but I think I'll probably lean Pierce. Let's do the Chargers real quick. I really don't feel strongly about anyone that they should hire here. Maybe an offensive guy, but I kind of feel like if you can just keep guys like healthy and maybe get a little speed on the outside, I think Herbert is capable of just kind of doing that by himself as long as you let him take enough shots. So I don't really feel strongly either way on a head coach for the Chargers. What about you?
I think they need a culture builder, and I think they need somebody who can, actually maximize the resources they've spent on defense, which I know sounds like Mike Vrabel, and it is Mike Vrabel. Like Vrabel would be great for the Chargers. But in terms of culture building, like that's going to be Harbaugh for me. Like he's done it everywhere, whether it's San Diego State, whether it's Stanford, whether it's the Niners, whether it's Michigan, like everywhere he goes. Obviously it takes a few years to kind of really get going because he's kind of a weird dude, but like eventually we've seen 4 jobs in a row now where he's built an incredible, tough, hard-nosed culture that wins championships, or at least gets in position to win championships. So I think Harbaugh is kind of the answer to fix the cultural problems that I think existed during the back end of that Staley era. And in terms of fixing the defense, the reason why I also bring up Harbaugh is because he would probably bring Jesse Minter. And boy, if you want to fix that defense quick, you bring in Jesse Minter as Harbaugh's DC. He can fix that.
Last but not least, Falcons. They got a head start on this real quick. I feel like the only passed away they could have moved on from Arthur Smith is if they fired him directly after the game was over. But 12:01 midnight, the Falcons fired Arthur Smith. And by all intents and purposes, it seems like Arthur Blank is going to take some real hacks this offseason to improve the head coach and the quarterback spot. They've already been linked to Bill Belichick. I've heard that they're going to try getting the Harbaugh game. I would like Harbaugh. I would take Belichick. I would take Ben Johnson. I would take Mike Vrabel. I would take you if you can come with a quarterback. Like, anyone who can get me a league average quarterback could come be the head coach of this team. And that's how I feel. Like I don't feel strongly about any candidate. I would say if it's not a defensive guy, you got to do whatever it takes to keep Ryan Nielsen on staff for another year and get him a pass rusher, please. But dude, I'm so indifferent on who his head coach is. Just please get a quarterback, please. I'm not built for this life, man.
So can I sell you on, because they're not going to trade up for Jaden Daniels, mainly because if Jaden Daniels is going to number 3, he's just going to New England anyway. So like they're not going to get one of those top guys. So you have two options. You can either slightly trade down and go the Bo Nix route, if you believe in Bo Nix, or
no, I don't.
You bring in Ben Johnson, you send a 2 to Chicago for Justin Fields, and then you send like a 5 to Washington for Jacoby Brissett. Your quarterback room is Fields, Brissett, and then I guess Ritter is your 3 because we're out. You use your 1 on Rome Odunze, so then you get Justin Fields, Drake London, Rome Odunze, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, an offensive line we like, Ben Johnson, Colin. Like they still got some defensive talent we like as well. You use a day 2 pick on insert pass rushing interior lineman that you like here, Chris Jenkins from Michigan, like whoever. And you roll with that. Like that to me is the best case scenario for Atlanta. And it's a plausible scenario too. And even if they don't immediately become a powerhouse, they would at least be watchable. And I think Falcons fans, not to speak for them, I think Falcons fan would just take watchable at this point.
Yeah, watchable's fine. Look, I have no delusions about what this is. I'm still here after the Super Bowl. So I feel like it's not fair. You know, it's not fair for me to expect them to be competent. That's just not what they are. But I'll take watchable. You know, like I grew up on a team where you could go to a game when Michael Vick was a quarterback and you could run into Ludacris in the bathroom, bro. You know, it's not like that anymore. It's not fun. And quite honestly, like I will fully admit on this, I'm 100% spoiled. My entire life, I've had a quarterback. Michael Vick, he has his little, hashtag incidents. You're out for a year. And then, his little incident that landed him in prison for 2 years. But then you have one down year and then you get Matt Ryan. You're right back at it. 15 years, quarterback stability, competence, playoff games. I don't know what, I don't recognize like what this is anymore. I'm not having fun. So I just want to get back to having fun. I kind of wish that, now that we're here, I wish they had dropped a few more games during the season, because I think the biggest problem with trying to trade up this year is those teams at the top desperately need quarterbacks too. So they might not even be willing to part with those picks. Like if I'm the Commanders, there's almost nothing you could give me that'll make me trade off of number 2.
I wouldn't even pick
if
up
I'm the Patriots, wouldn't even there's unless you're going to send me like 4 first-round picks and a Pro Bowl player, there's nothing you can do to get me to come up off number 2. So you're probably in the trade for Justin Fields, see what happens with Kirk Cousins. But hey, that's better than what you did. Just make the games watchable again. That's all I'm asking for. That is my decree and my demand. I want to watch a Falcons game for 3 hours, and even if they lose by the end of it, I just want to be able to say that was entertaining. I haven't been able to say that in a long time, you know?
The only games that you really have to win are against the Saints. Like, that's it. Like, that's the requirement. Just beat the Saints.
Yeah. Even Matt's been shaky recently, too. But you know what? Like Jimmy Graham said, the Falcons, the Saints. And that's where we will end this podcast today. So, Brett, I thank you. Before we get out of here, once again, please remind the people where they can find you.
You can find me, well, this time of year, it's one time a week because we're trying to do playoff coverage and draft coverage and planning Super Bowl travel all at the same time. One time a week over at the Bootleg Football podcast. And then I've got my own channel at Brett Kollmann, where I got a Chiefs offense episode coming out. I got a Khalil Mack episode coming out on the Chargers channel pretty soon here. And then the NFL sent me some vintage mid-2000s Bob Sanders All-22. So I'm going to do a Bob Sanders 2006 retrospective on the NFL channel pretty soon here, which I think I might be shooting from the Combine in Indy. And then at the same time, I also, I'm going to have them send me some Marvin Sr. All-22 from the early 2000s. So I might do a Marvin Sr. versus Marvin Jr. episode from out there too. So lots coming.
Wow, that's a lot of good stuff.
Are you going to the Combine, by the way?
Yeah, Combine, Super Bowl, all that stuff.
Okay, cool. I'll see
so
there.
I'll definitely run into you. Appreciate you coming on. As always, send us a voicemail. You can send us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/0blitz. Ask a question. How does take? Make fun of the show. Make fun of the Falcons. Make fun of the Saints. Listen to reply on the show. We'll be back with another episode of the Exempt List next Tuesday. We're going to get back on the Tuesday beat every week. Had to let Charles and Jory get Tuesday this week, so they can break down all the breaking news from the head coaching firings. Tune in tomorrow for an episode of Zero Blitz with Jason Fitz. I'm Charles McDonald. You can find me on Twitter at 4verts. Brett is on Twitter at Brett Kollmann. That's 2 N's, 2 L's. And Stone, our producer, is at SJ Rochelle on Twitter. And we will see you on Twitter. We will see you next week. Jesus.